Zuri Kamau was 28, working as an assistant accountant in Nairobi. She rented a tiny apartment in her parents' compound, a simple space she paid for each month without complaint. Since her father passed away, everything in that compound seemed to revolve around her mother and her older sister, Tasha. They decided who did what, when, and how. Zuri had learned to stay quiet, to keep the peace. One evening, as she was closing her laptop after work, a message from her mother popped up on her phone. Tasha needs help with her twins. You'll move in to assist. You won't pay rent if you help her daily. Zuri just stared at it for a while. She worked long hours, often bringing work home. Helping out once in a while was fine, but this sounded like a full-time job she never asked for. She typed back carefully, trying to stay respectful. Mama, I work full-time. I can visit, but I can't be her maid. No reply came. The next morning, she joined her family for breakfast. Tasha sat at the table, looking smug. Between bites of toast, she said casually, "If you can't help, maybe Mama will have to raise your rent." Zuri's hand froze midair. The message was clear. This wasn't about helping or family love. It was about control. In that moment, she felt a quiet anger rise in her chest. For years, she'd tried to keep peace by obeying. But now she could see it clearly. They didn't want her to live, they wanted her to serve. And she knew something had to change. Within a few weeks, what was supposed to be a simple visit slowly turned into a trap. Zuri had agreed to stop by Tasha's house after work sometimes, just to help with the twins. But somehow those visits became daily. Then they became expected. It started with phone calls. In the middle of her office hours, her phone would buzz nonstop. "Zuri, come feed the babies. Zuri, the dishes are piling up. Mama said you live here rent-free, remember?" Zuri would stare at her phone, torn between frustration and guilt. She wanted to be helpful, but she also needed to keep her job. Every time she tried to explain that she couldn't just leave the office, her sister would hang up on her. Minutes later, her mother would call. "Stop being selfish," she'd say. "Family comes before work." The word stung. Zuri had always been the responsible one, the one who paid her bills on time, who showed up, who helped whenever she could. But now, no matter what she did, it was never enough. If she said she was tired, they called her ungrateful. If she stayed at work late, they accused her of thinking she was too important. If she refused to clean, they reminded her she was living rent-free, even though she still paid every month. At night, Zuri would sit in her small room, feeling like a stranger in her own home. Dinner would be ready, but no one would call her to eat. She'd hear her mother and sister laughing in the kitchen, and she'd quietly make herself a cup of tea instead. Sometimes, she'd overhear her mother whisper, "Your sister has forgotten where she came from." The words cut deep because Zuri hadn't forgotten. She'd just grown tired. Tired of being guilt-tripped. Tired of being treated like help instead of family. Her once loving home now felt like a cage. Every smile was fake. Every favor came with strings attached. Even her mother, the woman who used to tuck her in and tell her she could be anything, now used guilt like a weapon. Zuri began to dread going home after work. She'd stay late at the office just to have a few quiet hours to herself. Her coworkers thought she was hardworking, and she was, but deep down she was hiding. One night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing something she never wanted to admit. They didn't see her as family anymore. They saw her as a servant. That realization hit harder than any insult. And in that silence, Zuri began to understand. Sometimes, love can feel like chains when it's tied to control. It was a quiet Saturday night, the kind that should have felt peaceful. But for Zuri, it was another long evening spent scrubbing dishes and wiping down her sister's kitchen, while everyone else slept. The twins were finally quiet, the floor was spotless, and her back ached from standing all day. She looked at the clock. It was past midnight. As she turned off the lights and headed to her room, she heard soft voices from the next room. Her mother and Tasha were talking. Zuri almost kept walking, but something in her mother's tone made her pause. "If she doesn't obey, raise her rent to double," her mother whispered. "That'll humble her." Zuri froze. The words hit her like cold water. She stood still in the dark hallway, heart pounding, her hands trembling. They weren't just trying to teach her responsibility. They wanted control, complete control. For months, she had done everything to keep the peace. She helped with the twins, cooked dinner, paid rent, and still managed her full-time job. Yet, in their eyes, it was never enough. They didn't see her sacrifices, only her refusal to be a servant. Zuri crept back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. She looked around her tiny space, the neatly folded clothes, her laptop on the desk, the framed photo of her late father smiling warmly. He was the only one who ever made her feel seen, the only person who reminded her that she mattered. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, she felt a deep, calm clarity settle in. All this time, she had been paying for peace, but peace shouldn't come with a price tag. No matter how much she gave, they would always want more. Lying awake that night, Zuri stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Every guilt trip, every harsh word, every fake smile. She finally whispered to herself, maybe disappearing isn't running away. Maybe it's freedom. By morning, she knew what she had to do. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no goodbyes. Just quiet resolve. She got up before sunrise, folded her clothes neatly into a small suitcase, packed her laptop, and placed her father's photo gently on top. When she stepped outside, the air was cool and still. For a moment, she stood in the compound, listening to the faint sound of birds waking up. Then she walked away, one steady step at a time, not out of fear, but out of strength. Zuri didn't know where she was going yet. She just knew she couldn't stay where she was being diminished. For the first time in years, she wasn't seeking approval. She was seeking herself. Zuri didn't say a word to anyone. Not to her mother, not to Tasha, not even to her co-workers. She walked into her office on Monday morning, typed up her resignation letter, printed it, and placed it on her boss's desk. No explanations, no long speeches, just a quiet, firm decision. By the end of that week, she had packed her things, withdrawn her savings, and booked a one-way ticket to Mombasa. As the bus rolled out of Nairobi, she watched the city lights fade behind her, her heart heavy but calm. Every mile that passed felt like she was peeling away another layer of pain. When she arrived in Mombasa, the salty air greeted her like a new beginning. She rented a small apartment near the ocean, nothing fancy, but it was hers. The sound of waves at night felt like music, a rhythm that reminded her she was still alive, still capable of starting over. Within days, she found a job at a small tourism firm. The pay wasn't great, but the people were kind, and no one expected her to clean, serve, or explain herself. For the first time in years, she could breathe without fear of disappointing anyone. Zuri bought a new phone and changed her number. She didn't tell her family where she was. The first few days, messages flooded her old WhatsApp, angry texts from her mother, emotional voice notes from Tasha. Accusations, guilt trips, apologies that didn't sound real. She read a few, then blocked the numbers and deleted the account. She wasn't running anymore. She was reclaiming her peace. Every evening after work, she'd walk along the beach barefoot, the sand cool beneath her feet. She'd watch the waves crash and retreat, the horizon glowing with orange and gold. Sometimes she'd whisper softly to herself, "No one owns me anymore." The words became her prayer, her promise. Each night, she'd return to her small apartment, cook a simple meal, and sit by the window listening to the sea. There were moments she missed her father deeply, his calm voice, his gentle wisdom, but she knew he would have understood why she had to leave. The quiet felt strange at first, almost too still, but slowly, that silence began to heal her. No shouting, no guilt, no demands, just peace. One night, as she lay in bed with the windows open and the ocean breeze flowing in, Zuri smiled for the first time in a long while. She had lost everything familiar, her family, her home, her old life. But what she found in return was something far greater, freedom. And as the waves whispered outside, she finally felt what it meant to breathe freely, not just with her lungs, but with her heart. The next 3 years became the most unexpected chapter of Zuri's life. She didn't just start over, she rebuilt herself from the ground up. In Mombasa, she learned how to live quietly, how to think clearly, and how to trust her own ideas again. Her job at the tourism firm gave her just enough money to live on, but it also gave her inspiration. Every day, she met travelers who loved the coast, but complained about how few eco-friendly places there were to stay. One evening, while watching the sunset from her balcony, she thought, what if I could build something better? That small thought turned into a side project. Zuri began sketching designs for cozy, sustainable vacation villas made from local materials, bamboo, coral stone, recycled. She called the idea Zuri Villas Africa. She worked on it at night and during weekends, teaching herself business management and digital marketing through free online courses. Her laptop became her best friend. At first, it was just a dream, but then she built a simple website and posted her ideas on social media. Within months, a travel blogger featured her designs, and messages started pouring in. Investors from Europe reached out, curious about her concept. Zuri was shocked and thrilled. Slowly, her side hustle became a business. She hired a few local builders and opened her first villa, a small, ocean view retreat with solar panels and handmade furniture. Guests loved it. Photos of the villa began circulating online, tagged with captions like, "Hidden Gem in Mombasa, Zuri Villas." Before long, she had 3 villas up and running, each one fully booked most months. She kept her success quiet. No press releases, no boasting, just consistent work. Her peace meant more than fame ever could. Back in Nairobi, her family had no idea. They assumed she was barely surviving by the coast. Her sister, Tasha, often posted online about family loyalty and ungrateful siblings. Some people forget family after we raise them, Tasha wrote one day. Zuri came across the post while scrolling through her business page. She stared at it for a moment, the old sting of guilt trying to return. But this time it didn't. She simply smiled softly to herself. I didn't forget, she whispered. I just remembered myself. Her life was finally hers. She woke up to the sound of waves, worked with a team that respected her, and built something that made a real difference. The girl who once scrubbed dishes past midnight was now designing homes by the sea. Every evening, when she walked along the beach, she thought about how far she'd come. No one had rescued her. She had rescued herself. And that, she realized, was the most beautiful kind of freedom. Back in Nairobi, life wasn't so kind to Tasha. The same confidence she once used to control everyone began to crack. Her husband discovered she'd been lying about money, shifting funds, hiding debts, pretending they were doing better than they were. When the truth came out, he packed his bags and left without looking back. Suddenly, the big house that once made her feel powerful became a burden. The rent piled up, bills went unpaid, and her phone never stopped ringing with reminders and warnings. Her once perfect life was falling apart piece by piece. Their mother wasn't doing well either. Age had slowed her down, and her health was failing. She could barely manage the family property anymore. The tenants complained about repairs, rent collection stopped being regular, and the compound that once felt like the family's pride started to fall into disrepair. In the middle of all this, they both thought about Zuri. The quiet one, the one they used to mock. Maybe they thought she could help. At first, Tasha sent a few texts to Zuri's old number. No reply. Then she tried calling. The line didn't exist anymore. Days turned into weeks, and she began to panic. It was like Zuri had vanished completely. Maybe she's in trouble, their mother said weakly one evening. You should find her. Tasha nodded, but deep down she wasn't just looking for her sister. She was looking for a way out of her own mess. Desperate, she called one of Zuri's old colleagues from the accounting firm. She pretended to sound casual, but her voice shook. Hi, this is Tasha, Zuri's sister. I've been trying to reach her. Do you know where she works now? It's kind of urgent. The colleague sounded surprised. Oh, you mean Ms. Kamau, he said, almost proudly. The owner of Zuri Villas? She's one of Mombasa's top businesswomen now. Haven't you seen her in the news? Tasha froze. The phone almost slipped from her hand. Owner, she whispered. The word felt heavy in her mouth. For years, she had treated Zuri like the weak one, the helper, the little sister who couldn't stand up for herself. And now, that same girl had built a life so big, so far beyond their control, that even strangers spoke her name with respect. After hanging up, Tasha just sat there in silence. The walls of her house felt smaller than ever. Her mother kept asking if she found out anything, but Tasha couldn't bring herself to speak. For the first time, she realized that while she and her mother were busy trying to keep Zuri down, Zuri had quietly learned how to rise. And now, the power they once used against her had completely lost its meaning. The house that once belonged to the family was now just another thing crumbling under the weight of its own pride. The afternoon heat hung heavy over Mombasa, the kind that made the air feel still and slow. Zuri was in her office reviewing some design proposals when her receptionist buzzed the intercom. A woman named Tasha Kamau is here to see you. Zuri froze for a moment, her pen stopping midair. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since she walked away from everything. Her heart tightened as she looked toward the glass door. The past, it seemed, had finally found her. Send her in, she said quietly. A few seconds later, Tasha walked in. Her once polished look was gone. Her clothes looked worn, her eyes puffy from crying. She forced a shaky smile before the tears started. Zuri, she said, voice breaking. We're in trouble. Mama's sick. We need help. The rent's overdue. Everything's falling apart. Zuri leaned back in her chair, silent. The sight of her sister brought a rush of old memories. The guilt, the control, the words that used to sting. But now there was no anger left, only calm. Tasha kept talking, her words tumbling out in desperation. Please, Zuri, you're the only one who can save us. Mama misses you. She's weak. We can't even afford her medicine. Zuri's expression stayed unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. You raised my rent once, she said quietly. Now the world raised yours. The room fell silent. Tasha's tears stopped mid-breath. For a moment, she looked like she might fall apart completely. Zuri could have used that moment to humiliate her, to say all the things she'd held back for years. But she didn't. That wasn't who she was anymore. Instead, she opened her drawer, pulled out a small card, and wrote down an address. Then she slid it across the desk. This is a women's shelter I sponsor, she said. Tell Mama she can stay there until she's better. They'll take care of her. Tasha stared at the card, confused. That's it? She asked, voice trembling. That's all I can do, Zuri replied gently. The rest is up to you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of waves outside the window filled the silence between them. Finally, Tasha nodded slowly, her eyes filled with regret more than pride now. She took the card, whispered a soft thank you, and walked out without looking back. When the door closed, Zuri sat there quietly, staring at the empty chair across from her. Her chest felt heavy, but not in pain. It was something closer to release. The girl they once tried to control had become a woman they had to ask for help. Outside, the ocean wind brushed against the window, carrying with it a quiet truth. Sometimes, life finds its own way to balance the scales. That night, the air in Mombasa was soft and quiet. The waves rolled gently against the shore, the moonlight spilling across the ocean like silver paint. Zuri sat by the wide window of her coastal villa, barefoot, a cup of tea warming her hands. It had been hours since Tasha left her office, yet the conversation kept replaying in her mind, especially those old words she'd once overheard. "We'll raise her rent." Back then, those words had felt cruel, like a threat that stripped her of power. But now they sounded almost ironic. Life had a strange way of circling back, and this time, it wasn't her who was trapped by rent or fear. Her friend and business partner, Amara, walked in quietly, holding 2 glasses of wine. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside her. Zuri smiled faintly. "Yeah, just thinking." Amara gave her a curious look. "So that was your sister, huh? The one you told me about?" Zuri nodded. "She came asking for help. Mama's sick, rent's overdue, everything's falling apart." Amara hesitated before asking, "And you helped them?" Zuri nodded again, her eyes fixed on the moon. "I sent them to the shelter. Somewhere safe, where Mama can rest." Amara leaned back in her chair, watching her closely. "You could have done more. Or, you could have taken revenge. After everything they did to you, no one would have blamed you." Zuri turned to her with a calm smile. "Because disappearing was the revenge," she said softly. "They can't control what they can't find." For a long moment, they both sat in silence, the sound of the sea filling the space between their thoughts. Amara smiled slowly, shaking her head. "You know, you're stronger than you think." Zuri chuckled. "I used to think strength meant fighting back. But sometimes it just means walking away, quietly and never turning around." She looked out the window again, watching the moonlight ripple over the wave. For years, her life had been about survival, keeping peace, pleasing everyone, paying her way just to be tolerated. But tonight, she felt something deeper. Peace without fear. Success without bitterness. She thought about the girl she used to be, tired, scared, standing in that compound trying to prove her worth. And now, here she was, living by the ocean, running a company that helped women find their freedom. The irony wasn't lost on her. "They tried to make me smaller," she whispered, "but all they really did was push me to grow." Amara smiled at her words. The 2 women sat there quietly, watching the waves crash and retreat, knowing that sometimes silence itself carries the loudest message. For Zuri, the lesson was simple. Real freedom doesn't come from revenge. It comes from letting go. And that night, under the soft Mombasa moon, she finally felt the peace she had spent her whole life chasing. Months passed, and the rainy season came to Mombasa. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and sea salt. Zuri had settled into her new rhythm. Work, long walks on the beach, quiet dinners with friends. Life felt steady, peaceful. She hadn't thought much about Nairobi or her family lately. The past had finally stopped chasing her. One morning, her receptionist walked into the office holding a plain brown envelope. "This came for you," she said. There was no return address, just her name written in shaky handwriting. Zuri's heart paused for a moment. She recognized that handwriting immediately. It was Tasha's. She took the letter into her office and sat down before opening it. The paper was creased and slightly smudged, as if it had been handled too many times before being sent. The words were few but heavy. "You were never the maid. You were the strength. I see that now." That was all. Just one short paragraph that carried years of pain, pride, and apology. Zuri read it twice, maybe 3 times. A wave of emotion washed over her. Not anger, not sadness, but something gentler. She could almost hear her sister's voice, shaky and uncertain, reaching out across the distance between them. For a long moment, Zuri just sat there, staring out the window at the ocean. The waves rolled in and out, calm and endless. She thought about all the years she had spent trying to earn love that was always conditional. And now, this tiny letter, just a few sentences, felt like the closure she never knew she needed. She didn't write back. Not because she was cold, but because she didn't have to. Some stories don't need to be reopened. Some peace is found in silence. That evening, she went home, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by her bedroom drawer. Inside it, she kept only a few precious things. Her first business registration papers, a seashell she picked up the day she moved to Mombasa, and a photo of her late father, smiling, kind, and proud. She carefully folded the letter and placed it beside his picture. Her eyes softened as she looked at it. "You'd be proud, Papa," she whispered. "Your quiet girl learned how to roar." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled through it. It wasn't a tear of sadness, it was release. For the first time, she didn't feel like the hurt daughter or the forgotten sister. She felt like a woman who had finally forgiven without needing an apology. As the rain tapped softly against the window, Zuri closed the drawer, took a deep breath, and let the past rest exactly where it belonged, behind her. The lights in the Mombasa ballroom glowed softly, reflecting off the ocean waves just beyond the glass wall. Guests in elegant clothes mingled around the tables, laughter mixing with the sound of live music. At the center of it all stood Zuri Kamau, calm, radiant, and confident. Behind her, a large banner read, Zuri Foundation, empowering women to stand free. It had been years since she walked away from Nairobi, but tonight, her story had come full circle. The girl who once felt trapped now stood as a woman who built doors for others to walk through. When it was time for her speech, Zuri stepped up to the podium. Cameras flashed, and a few reporters leaned forward, eager to capture her words. One of them asked, "What inspired you to start this foundation?" Zuri paused for a moment, her smile gentle but knowing. "Family taught me a lesson," she said softly. "Sometimes love means walking away." The crowd went quiet. Her words carried the kind of honesty that didn't need explanation. She continued, her voice steady, her eyes glimmering in the warm light. "They once threatened to raise my rent unless I served them," she said. "So I paid life back by building my own home." A ripple of applause filled the room. Zuri smiled, her heart full. She wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. She was thinking about every woman who ever felt small, every person who ever believed leaving meant losing. Later, as the event ended and the cameras panned toward the open sea, Zuri's voice played softly in the background, her final reflection. "I didn't vanish to hide," she said. "I vanished to become visible." And with that, the story of Zuri Kamau, the girl who walked away and rose again, came quietly, beautifully full circle.